I'm Saeed Gordon with DOF Creations. We have Larry Mason with Fortinet. Our discussion for today is defense in depth, learning about how defense in depth is a strategy for covering as many bases as possible within the cybersecurity space today. The idea of utilizing one resource, like the SIM, which was the one size fits all security solution just a few years ago, as a way to cover all your bases or the majority of your bases, has quickly fallen by the wayside. We all understand that that is not what cybersecurity is today. Larry's going to be discussing the Fortinet fabric, specifically Fortinet resources that can support in that space, but he's also going to take a step back and I guess do a 10,000-foot view of what is defense in depth and how has the new style of attack and the constant evolution of cybersecurity attack and cybersecurity defense will revolutionize what network security is for us today, those of us in this IT space. So before we get started, I'm going to touch briefly on some grant resources and some of the processes of identifying programs that can be used to support network and cybersecurity, but as well as addressing other areas of technology. Since most of the folks that we work with are in the space of the public sector and nonprofit, and of course, our private sector customers are not really able to take advantage of those resources, when we're looking at the types of grant programs and grant resources that can be used to address some of these issues and some of these topics, we first ask anybody we work with to look at who they are and the resources that they support. If you're in the healthcare space, of course, there are going to be programs dedicated to healthcare. You want to start addressing your needs from the perspective of how is healthcare being funded to address our needs. So if you're supporting law enforcement, first responders, if you're supporting education, you want to make sure that you're looking at the service impact of the organization that you're supporting and looking at federal funding that's dedicated to those resources. That's going to be your first step in determining what is actually available and out there for you. So when we're looking at that first step, who is it that you're supporting and serving, and what impact are those you're supporting and serving making around you? Then you're going to want to start looking at how those funds are going to be dedicated or utilized for those technology projects. And then how are those technology projects supporting those individuals that you're serving? So if we're looking at a local government situation, law enforcement is a major area that has received a boost in funding since COVID, increased crime rates, concerns about public safety. How is technology supporting law enforcement? How is security supporting the ability for local law enforcement, police, sheriff, even other first responders to make sure that they're able to get out to people in need, to securely communicate with one another, to access data and resources in the field? What about those in administration being able to securely access their data and their resources? You also have the expansion of remote working, even within the law enforcement space. You still have plenty of people within administration that work remotely. That adds another layer of security concern. How can you utilize federal funding to help you to get the resources or the support, the consulting resources you need to make sure that you can keep all of those different areas and concerns secure, understanding what is going on, what resources are most at risk, and how you're going to respond to all of that. So for those of us at DOF and how we approach the grant resources, you're looking at who you are and the types of individuals you support and their impact on your community. What is it that your technology is doing to support those individuals, and how does it feed into that? And then after you get to that place, of course, you have to look at all of the different people and resources within your organization that can then help you to go after those programs. Some folks have grant writers on staff that support IT. Many that we find do not. Some folks have somebody on staff that supports the administrative processes of being able to make sure that you understand what registrations and requirements, compliance models are in place that you have to adhere to. A lot of people do not. So we'll come in and we'll assist in that area if that's needed. But if you're fortunate enough to have those resources in place, lean on those grant writers, lean on those award managers that are already in place to help you through that process and to make sure that you are staying on top of what is already coming out. For many states, they have the FEMA programs. Those roll out in the summer. We're getting now into May. A lot of those programs will start becoming available in June, July, and August. If you're anybody within local government, state government, education, those programs are readily available for you. The challenge is going to be, do you have somebody on staff who can assist you with that process? If not, Fortinet, myself, we have teams and partners in place that can assist you through that process. But again, if you have those resources internally, go to them first. That's going to be your Department of Homeland Security at the federal level, and then the state emergency management office at the state level that is going to administer and manage that program. You want to make sure that you're reaching out to them now, because again, those programs have had a lot of change over the last 2 years. We've seen a lot of folks miss out on those programs because the release dates have come down with not a long time, not a large window or runway to be able to respond and apply to those programs. We've also seen some policy changes in that, particularly for the ones that have had the most flexibility to state governments to be able to go in and make changes and determine kind of how they're going to release those funds. So there's a lot to pay attention to with that, but those programs are readily available for cybersecurity. So I want to make sure that we briefly touch on what grant funding can do, how you can approach grant funding and identify grant funding. And again, I have to reiterate, when you're looking at grants, you want to look at the service impact and the ways that your technology and your team are supporting in the delivery of certain resources to your community or through your organization that you're supporting. That's going to be the first step in figuring out if there are grant programs available to you and what those would look like. Then from there, you can start looking at what are the internal resources you have to support that, what types of dollars are available, what are the timelines, and all of that type of stuff. If you don't have somebody in-house, please reach out to us at DOF Creations. You can also reach out to Fortinet. They have an excellent grants team. But just because you don't have somebody on staff doesn't mean that you can't get assistance to go after that funding. There are millions and sometimes billions of dollars that go back annually in unused resources. Just because folks are not aware of what funding is available, or sometimes they get scared because they're alone, they don't have the right assistance, they just assume that it's not going to work out because they don't know who they can turn to. So again, don't allow those dollars to go unused. If there's something out there, we know a lot of IT leaders who have a need. Almost everybody has a need in that space. Please go after it. So I know I'm not the focus of this. I'm going to stop and I'm going to pass it back to Larry. Larry is with the Fortinet team, of course. He has over 30 years experience within the IT space. He has supported on a variety of cybersecurity initiatives, and of course, within the network security space, helping a variety of public sector entities. And I think, Larry, you've kind of focused on education a lot in the last couple of years, but you bounced around and touched on local government, state government, I believe healthcare as well. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah. All the above.
Definitely. So he has a diverse array of knowledge across the public sector and nonprofit landscape, but he's going to be speaking today about how the fabric revolution is helping to address some of the changes that we're seeing across the cybersecurity and network security landscape, and what Defense in Depth can do to help us to all be a bit more secure. The new way forward as we have to make sure we're covering as many bases as possible, and the practical realities of that. So Larry, I'll pass it to you.
Great. Thank you for that great introduction. And welcome. I'm Larry, account representative up here in Jacksonville. Thanks for taking the time to watch our presentation today. That funding information was great. Makes me want to sign up myself, actually. So thanks for covering that. I think a lot of it we do see a lot of it go unclaimed every year, and especially for cybersecurity, it's kind of a shame. So we definitely don't want to see that happening. So how does that look?
I can see it. Yes.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the cybersecurity mesh platform. And as I go through, it'll come up a few times. But what I want to touch on before I get into it is Defense in Depth. Even back when I was in IT operations and network security, it used to be, this was before most companies even had secure organizations that fell onto the network team, myself and my team. And so when we deployed security solutions, we would look at a Defense in Depth. So we would try not to use the same firewall in more than one place in our network. And we would possibly use a different endpoint technology in one place or another. And of course, the SIEM, would tie everything together from a monitoring and triage standpoint. So Defense in Depth has changed a little bit to the point now is how can we share information amongst all these different visibility and control points and be able to program them as quickly as possible to deal with 0 days, because that's what we're all fighting, right? Is there's more bad guys than good guys, us, and we need to be really automated and have a really sophisticated approach that's easy to use, because complexity is the enemy of security, as we like to say. So I'll touch on what's currently going on in the industry as I go through this, and want to give a little bit of a who is Fortinet. A lot of times people think we make a video game, and that is not true. We're actually a cybersecurity company that's been around for greater than 20 years, helping protect our customers' networks. And anybody that knows us probably thinks that we're a firewall company. We certainly are an amazing firewall company, but we also have greater than 50 integrated fabric products. So I'll touch on that towards the last of it, but we're more than just firewalls. We're a complete networking and infrastructure company for security. We're publicly traded. We're strong financially, so you don't have to worry about us disappearing. So when customers choose to do business with Fortinet, you don't have to worry about us being around. So we're very solid. Something else that we do, and we're about the only vendor in this space left that does this, we design and have our own ASICs manufactured. So our firewall hardware appliances have custom ASICs, and how that benefits you is faster and more reliable security processing. So it basically is economy of scale from a money standpoint. You know, how much can we protect per gigabyte? What does it cost to protect? For us, it's the lowest in the industry because we can do it the fastest. We have a global footprint for our support, NOC and SOC services, along with development. So that's important to know. Most of the people on this call are probably just Florida, but we do have organizations all over the world that have worldwide operations. So it's important that we can do business in all these countries. Something I like to touch on here is we have roughly 1,300 patents, which is twice as many as the nearest vendor in our space. So we've been at this a long time, and we're really into innovation. Sure, we have bought a few technologies to integrate into our platform. We really pride ourselves in creating our own products and patenting those technologies so they work better together. And out of the roughly 14,000 employees we have today, you can see over 2,300 of that are development engineers, 2/3 in software, and 1/3 in hardware. So if you looked at the slide 10 years ago, it would probably be quite a bit different. You would probably see a lot more hardware engineers and software engineers, but it's the nature of where we're going. Going into the cloud obviously and virtualization requires a lot of software. So customer trends, I don't really need to tell you all this, but there are a few things that we see as we go on. Our purview is we talk to a lot of people in a week, all of us here on the call, and definitely use that knowledge and see what your peers are doing. But essentially, COVID really drove the work from anywhere paradigm, into kind of mainstream, right? So everybody had a work from home component. It doesn't matter what type of organization you were. Some were 100%, some were, some percentage. But what we see as a trend now is some of that's coming back. So, organizations of all size are requiring their employees to come back into the office. But what we're also seeing is they're offering generally a hybrid solution, right? So they're, maybe you have Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday at the office, but Monday and Friday you work from home. And really what drives that is being able to attract and retain the top talent in our industry, which is the box over on the right. If anybody's tried to hire a cybersecurity expert in the last couple of years, you know what we're talking about. There is not one company or organization or agency or school we walk in today that says that they've had too many applicants for these type of roles, right? And the schools are doing a good job all the way from K-12 up through the universities of gearing up and producing qualified candidates. It just hasn't happened fast enough. So there's definitely a skills shortage, and that's part of what sets up what we're talking about today. And then, of course, preventing cyber attacks. So, like I said, there's more of them than us because there's a lot of money in nation state cybersecurity and whatever else, ransomware, you name it. Most organizations just can't keep up and don't have the tools and the staff to be able to deal with it all. So this kind of lays it out from a an architectural application standpoint. So what we're really looking at is we have all types of users and devices all over the place, right? So we have within your four walls, which is typically easier to secure. Work from home, which is now obviously we're all doing it. Travel, that's been an issue for a long time. How do I deal with remote employees that are joining untrusted Wi-Fi's over the world? And this has been going on, but it's gotten a lot more attention as of recent, is OT networks and IoT devices, because typically you can't load agents on those like EDR or some sort of advanced endpoint. So if somehow they have some bad code and it gets installed on your network, you need to be able to profile that device and be able to deal with it appropriately. And of course, networks have grown, right? It used to just be it's been a while since I've been in operations. We were just deploying the first Wi-Fi network. So that tells you how long it's been since I was in IT operations. But networks have grown a lot. We rely on a lot of different technologies, and with 5G becoming WAN-like speeds or becoming like desktop speeds, there's more and more devices that are being pushed out to the edge, and more applications and data that's actually being pushed out to the edge, which I always like to talk about. When we started this whole thing with mainframes many years ago, everything was centralized, and then Novell and Windows came along. We went to this kind of decentralized model. And then great technologies like Citrix and VDI came along, and we kind of brought everything back into the data center, and we put out thin clients. But we're kind of going back out to the edge again based on things like Docker and containerized computing. We can run applications at the edge that we couldn't run before because of the bandwidth that we have and the horsepower that we have at the edge. So there's some sort of hybrid thing going on. And then, of course, introduce cloud, right? I don't know if everybody on this particular call has anything in the cloud. We do a thing called a cyber threat assessment, which we call CTAP for short. We can come in and we can tell you what applications running in the cloud, and sometimes you'd be quite surprised with what we can help you find. So applications data everywhere. And then SecOps, that's a maturity level that only organizations typically have that have really deep pockets and a lot of staff, but everybody needs it, right? So SecOps as a service, we offer it. You can get that through us through DOF Creations. Basically give you more time back in the day by looking over your shoulder and helping you deal with your cybersecurity challenges in a central managed and automated way. I left this slide in. I thought about taking it out, but it's kind of a paradigm between what large enterprises are saying versus smaller enterprises, and talking more about business, but this can be public sector is the same. It's really, we all have the same challenges: lack of visibility, not enough control. We're worried about putting in too much control and causing friction to the organization, and then the lack of staff to be able to deal with things that arise, right? And then, of course, something that really needs a lot of attention is, what happens if we do have an incident like a breach? What is my scenario? Do I have a playbook written for that? Have I done a tabletop exercise? Do I know how to alert the media if I have to, or parents if I'm a school, or those type of things, right? So we're here to assist with all that, but the challenges are the same. The difference is the big organizations have more budget. A lot of times they waste money throwing money at solutions and not really looking at the process. So that's kind of why I like to put that in here. I just always like to remind people, look at the process. So back to defense in depth. This slide's a couple years old, but I call this my killer attack slide. And the reason is that's basically what you feel like when you look at it. In a defense in depth world, you would look at all these different practice areas. I know they're hard to read because there's so many different ones, but if you had to go out and engage a vendor in every one of these boxes, you would probably, I don't even have to tell you what you would do yourself. So it's crazy. So this really isn't scalable. And, based on this, the industry really has come to a fabric, to get together, and let's put it so to speak. So we introduced what we call the Fortinet security fabric. And the whole idea here is you need to build, you can't control what you can't see. So you have to have really good visibility at all your enforcement points to be able to get the telemetry to turn around and go back and create policy that's going to protect you from the adversaries. integration is really important because it doesn't do a lot of good to have a really good firewall, but somebody takes their endpoint to Starbucks and they download something on it and it doesn't have an advanced endpoint and the firewall's not there to protect them anymore, unless you're forcing the VPN to go back through, right? So depending on your organization's security policy, that can be all over the place. So having an integrated threat response and threat intelligence is really, really important. And I'll touch a little bit more on that. And that needs to be automated. And this was once reserved for organizations with deep pocket and a lot of full-time employees that had a SOC where they could actually run an automated system like a SOAR. If anybody hasn't heard SOAR, it's a security orchestration, automation, and remediation, basically, for security. So the whole idea is I see a bunch of events come in, I correlate those from my firewall data, my endpoint data, my cloud data, my honeypots, wherever it is. I come up with an event that I can correlate together, and it's something that I can triage, and then I can automate the response to it. So think of like a phishing email comes in and we detect it. It goes through the firewalls like that's a phishing email, whether it's known or unknown, we're able to determine that. And what we can do is we can go to Exchange and we can find all the instances of that email and delete them before the users open them, right? So that's some automated response. And that's a drag and drop visual playbook technology. And we offer that in, a bunch of different flavors. And, we could talk about all that offline, but everybody can use automation, give you more time back in your day. So what did Gartner go and do? They created this cybersecurity mesh architecture. And if you look at this, and you're in the security network practice, you're probably going to go, oh my God, that's unbelievable. All those things have to talk to each other. And, it's just kind of crazy. To a certain degree, yes, you may have or not have a lot of these technologies, depending on how much SaaS and applications you develop yourself. But depending on regulatory compliance, you may have a lot of these and you may have certain things that you have to do to protect yourself. Ours is much simpler. We've been at this for a long time, and this is basically the evolution of our security fabric. So I go back quite a ways in this, and segmentation was really one of the first things that we picked off. It was probably, even though it's never easy to segment your network with firewalls, it was probably the lowest hanging fruit to be able to get my servers on their own network and split my OT network off and have printers on a different VLAN and IoT devices and cameras on a different VLAN, and obviously phones and video devices would be on different, segmented VLANs, right? So from and then you can't cross VLANs because now I can keep things from, laterally moving around my network, right? So segmentation, and then you can see what we did here at Fortinet is we added visibility control 2016, 17, even though we always had it, we just made it much better. And if you've looked at some of our solutions, I think you tend to agree. Automation really came out, and we've had this since March of 2018, and this is where the SOAR comes in, the orchestration remediation. We also offer that in our SIEM and our EDR platforms. So there's a lot of ways that we can help you skin the cat, depending on what your staff's appetite is like for being able to have us help you with automation. And then integrating all these products together obviously was a big thing, so they can share threat intelligence and share security profiles across, if you create a user in Active Directory and they're part of the VPN group, they can get to the SASE portal, automatically. And these are the policies, depending on the departments they're in, that they can get to. These are applications. And then over the last part is zero trust access. So this is a coined term by Forrester from a few years ago. And zero trust access is really the nirvana where you want to get. So it looks at all phases of the attack cycle, from reconnaissance all the way to weaponization and exfiltration, and it addresses that in a fairly easy to use solution that we have. This is just kind of a 10,000 foot view of what the platform looks like if you're to deploy it. So in the upper left-hand corner, you can see Gartner's little graphic there, which is kind of daunting. In the middle, basically at the bottom, you have your network operations, which is basically your management of your firewalls and your endpoints. In the middle, you have your SOC and the FortiGuard services from Fortinet. And what FortiGuard is, if you're not familiar with it, that is our threat intelligence service. And so our goal there is to take the unknown and turn it into known I mean, instantly as possible. And then we share that with everything at the top. So networking, zero trust, and adaptive cloud security. So those are your enforcement points that we're programming with all of our automated response. And then, of course, to the right is the ecosystem. And, obviously, everything we have talks together well, but we also talk to many other things, including, competitive solutions. So at the top, we have more than a dozen fabric connectors that we've written to talk to many commercially available things like, ticketing systems, leaf and spine network topology systems, obviously all the clouds. There's more than this, right? But today our solution runs on basically every cloud, including Alibaba, you name it, right? So we're out there everywhere. So the idea there is, yeah.
Can you go back 2 slides for me?
Sure. Did the question pop up? Yeah. This one?
Yes, this one. So do you mind taking us briefly through what each of those has meant to a network administrator, but also to a CIO and a CISO? So when we're looking at this, this is like 10 years of network security, but also cybersecurity.
Right.
What did segmentation mean to a network admin, to a CIO, and to a CISO? What was that groundbreaking at the time? Was that something that was kind of a hard ask at the time, or was that, kind of necessary to survive?
No, it was actually a hard ask, and a lot, it's really dependent on your organization, budget and requirement, right? So whenever you segment one piece of a network to another, from a technical standpoint, obviously there's a lot you have to do. Re-IP address everything. So if all your applications are hard-coded with IP addresses, it's going to be really hard to segment those onto a different network than they're already on. So typically you would leave the data center alone. So from the network engineer like myself that I used to be, I probably didn't want to do that because I know I'm going to be working a lot of weekends and off hours doing that, right? But from a management standpoint, what did that mean? They understand. By this time we're becoming more mature, right? Now we've got security operations folks as well that are dictating policy. Folks like me that are implementing the policy they dictate. The best practice was to have the security team say, these are the parts of the network I want segmented, and this is how I want it segmented, and these are security controls. Like you probably wouldn't put web filtering between different layers of the network depending on where you're at, but you might have IPS and DNS security turned on, right? So depending on the part of the network that you are segmenting, you're going to use different security controls and policies. So to do it right, typically you would have to have a security team to dictate that to the operations team, to pull that off.
And
yep.
As it related to segmentation, or not segmentation, but as we've transitioned to zero trust, what does zero trust mean? I've met a lot of folks, even within the IT space, when they're looking at what they're doing, they're trying to figure out, how is ZTNA different from who we are today and what we're doing? Yeah. What needs to be changed? Or are we doing a lot of the things that need to be done and we're basically 90% of the way?
Yeah, so segmentation and zero trust are mutually inclusive of each other to a big degree. And what zero trust says is, I have an application called Workday. We all know that's in the cloud, it's SaaS based, right? You can get to it from anywhere, but I may not want my employees to get to it from anywhere. So what you might want to do is, depending on the user and the device, zero trust says only these users get access to this applications. You can do that through segmentation internally. So if you have a data center and you have a bunch of elements in your data center that require SSH or RDP to manage those, I'm not going to just have, before we segmented, everybody in the organization, even if you're on VPN, had the ability to run RDP and attach to a jump server in the data center. Well, you may not want that. So zero trust initially, what it was is only specific users get to specific applications using specific protocols. It became far more sophisticated for us when we were able to leverage our existing FortiClient VPN, and where we added zero trust ZTNA, zero trust network access. So when you look at a traditional VPN today, you turn it on, you connect to wherever, whether it's SASE in the cloud or it's on-prem firewall, and now you have some sort of on-ramp into your organization's network, right? Now, of course, you can put security policy around that to lock things down. What ZTNA does is it does a per application VPN, and without the user knowing it. So for instance, Workday, like when I go to a SaaS application now, like Office 365 here at Fortinet, it uses my VPN client. I don't even know it. It creates a secure, trusted tunnel to Office 365 through our VPN fabric. So the first thing it does is it has to profile your device, and you think of all the things that, depending on the type of device, is it a mobile device, is it jailbroken, does it have the latest security software updates, does it have EDR, and then it uses MFA and SSO to profile the user. Something I have, something I know, right? And then it nails up the connection between my device that I'm on currently as Larry and that application. So that application can be anywhere. It could be SaaS hosted, it could be platform as a service, infrastructure service, it could be in my own data center. And I've got basically continuous authentication going on in the background without the user knowing it. So where a VPN, you nail it up and it has a time to live and it just goes away after a certain amount of time. Zero trust network access is a nice migration from today's VPN technology to actually yesterday's VPN technology to today's application access with a continuous authentication going on in the background without the user having to do anything. So that's really what's happening there. So it can be kind of confusing because we're throwing a lot of terminology around. But hopefully that made sense. So basically what it is we're using existing technologies in a fabric to be able to make it easier for the user to get to things more securely, kind of a 10,000 foot view.
I got you. And is it, as we talk or look at people who have, and of course I always think of this because we look from the grants perspective. I'm always working with folks who's, maybe they don't have small budgets, but maybe for their department, their budget has been tapped into a little bit too much and it's taken something away from them, or they just haven't gotten the resources that they need.
Right.
When we're looking at the difference between segmentation and zero trust, one, how big is that of a lift to get from segmentation to zero trust? And two, can you utilize segmentation if you don't feel you have the resources in place? Maybe it's just staffing and finances to go to a full ZTNA model for your network.
Right. Yeah. So you could actually go straight to zero trust, and here's why. So that same VPN client that I'm using outside of the network, I can also use inside of the network. Okay. So the nice thing about it is when I fire up my whatever device it is, when I get within my four walls and I'm attaching to an application in my data center, there's going to be a firewall somewhere, right? And so there does have to be some sort of segmentation for this to work, but that same VPN tunnel is being nailed up whether I'm inside or outside. So it's the same, user profiling, device profiling, and application access granted. Same exact rules whether I'm inside or outside. That's the real difference between zero trust, where segmentation, you can do it just based on policy and user access, which is good enough for a lot of organizations. But if you're going on and off the network, like today's hybrid user is, you really need something that gives them the same without doing anything different, because they don't want to do something different without doing anything different. So yeah, there's always going to have to be some sort of segmentation done before you can do a really good job of zero trust access, but it probably doesn't have to be as stringent.
And is there, at least on the segmentation side, because that process is, like you said, it can be very time consuming, and I'm sure, let me not make assumptions. Is asset identification step number one in segmentation? Is that something that, where technology is today, is that something that's just generally, automated and done for that department, or is that something they need to do manually before they go to step one of segmentation?
It's a combination of things. First, you need to know what you're going to segment, and then I recommend deploying a NAC. And the reason is we can do a lot of asset identification in our firewall natively. Our fabric, which is really amazing, and as far as I know, we're the only ones that do this at the level we do it. We profile most IoT devices right in our firewall natively. But if you want to really do it well, you can deploy Fortinet, and it will automatically go out and look at all your different network segments and tell you what's on those. And then you can use that report to help guide you with how you want to do your segmentation. Obviously, OT networks would be the lowest hanging fruit. it's a reality. It's a shocking one, but there's a lot of OT networks that are attached to IT networks, right? It's just, it is what it is. And we're here to help with that. And so that's a really good question. Yeah, you really need to know what you're going to do, and then you probably have to be able to do some sort of profiling to make it work. Because when you turn this thing on, you don't want to break something, right? So the more information that you have up front to be able to help you plan with this, and that's where we all come in, right? We can help our customers, get to that.
Gotcha. Well, I appreciate it, Larry.
Yeah, I don't want to miss anything. You don't know anybody, yeah, feel free, if you go in here. We're kind of getting down to the nitty gritty. So back to the mesh, right? Things that work together. We simplified what Gartner's, I like to call it the spaghetti slide, looks like, and then compare it to Fortinet. So very, very close. So we're already there, right? So, Gartner's been saying this for a couple of years. We felt like we were already 90% of the way there. We had to do some touch up and spray painting of some of our, marketing and product integration. And then we give you protection. And something else, that we get asked a lot about is cybersecurity frameworks, whether it's NIST, SANS, you name it, right? The CIS, whether you're getting things from CGIS or if you're a school and you're SIPA. Colleges don't really run into a lot of it. Maybe they get some PCI and some HIPAA stuff for, if they have, healthcare. This maps pretty well to all those in MITRE, right? So when you look at the regulatory requirements that every type of organization gets, and in public sector, there happens to be quite a few, looking at this can really help you map. And I don't want to just talk about individual products, but different product areas. And you can see they're color coded here, right? So if they're telling you have to have DLP for data loss prevention for some sort of a regulatory compliance, you can go right to one of these two graphics and see where those come in, right? So even if you don't follow a cybersecurity framework, take a look at one and start biting pieces of it off as you can. Odds are today you've already done a bunch of those and you don't know it, but it would really be nice to be able to map those out, because in the event that there is an event, when your insurance company comes along, you can show them that your progress to your readiness to being already compliant.
Excuse me, Larry.
Yep.
Is there the possibility that, if we have enough people transitioning to a ZTNA model and the utilization of, a strong NAC resource, whether, I know Fortinet, of course, but a really good, strong NAC resource, is there the possibility that we would just entirely go away from a SIM or that type of solution? I mean, if everything is really flowing into and out of the network, does ZTNA and the combination of, a really good NAC to identify your assets and what's going on, does that replace any of that, or are you always going to need to have your SIM and some of those resources?
Probably going to always need a SIM, and the reason why is it's vendor agnostic by nature. So yeah, and I have not walked into one company where they have everything from one vendor. Right? We would love that, but it's not a reality. So yeah, SIM's always going to be there for that vendor agnostic thing. Like FortiSIM talks to 4,500 different individual products, right? And so does NAC. So those are two products, and EDR. These are different solutions that we have. I like to call them solutions, not products, that actually are vendor agnostic. So if you're not a Fortinet customer today, you can deploy Fortinet, and we do an amazing job of profiling and managing the network that you have today, even without Fortinet devices. Now, works better together, but yeah, that's a really good question. You're probably always going to need some sort of a SIM. And my thing is, if me personally, I would probably looking at putting as much of this stuff in the cloud as I could and having it hosted. The reason is because, there's a database component, a tuning component, a elastic storage component to things like SIM. And do you really want to be in the business of managing your own SIM, right? So probably managed SIM, managed EDR, managed SOC services make a lot of sense for a lot of organizations that they just can't get the skills that are required or have the budget to be able to get those people.
Larry, in your opinion, kind of following up on that, how do you balance between on-prem and cloud as it relates to your network resources? I can't remember. I think it was we actually had a customer that was looking at Fortinet. I think it was the analyzer, and they were going back and forth between cloud or on-prem. The concerns about, if something happens and you lose internet, you've lost access to everything. And, how do you balance between the two, especially as we're looking at greater control of your network and all your resources through ZTNA?
Right. So it really comes down to philosophical standpoint of the customer. That, along with compliance. Some organizations can't put their data anywhere in the cloud. We're SOC 2 compliant, right? So you don't have to worry about that. So depending on the company, they may look at us and just say, we're never going to put anything in the cloud. That could be a philosophical standpoint from IT management, from the C-suite, right? Some C-suites fly somewhere, come back from vacation, and then tell IT put everything in the cloud because they read an article in the magazine on the airplane, right? So it happened to me. That's why I say it. So now all of a sudden, all the stuff I deployed over the last 10 years, we're migrating to the cloud. And here's what happens there. And this is a setup. So thanks for this. It's not the same, right? I don't have the same type of things. Now, in the end, it's amazing to be in the cloud, but it is expensive, right? So there's a cost component that goes along with it as well. And like you mentioned, the internet. If the internet goes down and you can't get to your SIM, that could be a problem. If the internet goes down and your EDR endpoints can't talk to the SaaS console, not as big of a problem because they have local AI, right? So depending on the type of solution, it really could depend on what it is that you're actually deploying in the cloud, determines whether you're going to put it there or not. And then, like I say, cost, philosophical, and regulatory. So there's a lot of different things. If I was a company today starting, like I was going to say, just pick a company like a DoorDash or Uber, I would probably do as much in the cloud as I could, just so I didn't have to manage it. And my IT staff could do things like planning and resources and integrating with the different business units and bringing applications to help enable a business more, rather than managing a data center, right? So yeah, I mean, that's just personal, Larry. Some people don't agree with that at all. They say, I don't want to lose control of anything. I want everything in my four walls, and that's the way it's always going to be. So yeah, it's and a combination of both. But what's funny about those folks is if we go in and rerun an assessment, we're going to find out at least a dozen applications they're using in the cloud they probably don't know about.
Yeah. And you also just mentioned the idea of keeping stuff in your four walls. I guess from a practical point of view, or yeah, I guess that's the right way to say that. Do four walls exist for any organization at this time? I mean, I don't know. I don't think I have a single customer that is exclusively on site, except from maybe, I think and I don't work with them, but I've met them before, a supervisor of elections. I think they may be the only people who are not at least 50, like maybe 40% remote for their staff and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about four walls, right? There are no walls. Your perimeter is everywhere you have a device and a user, right? So yeah, so there's the physical aspect, and then there's the virtual aspect to when the user leaves. And if I have Outlook on my phone, my perimeter just goes everywhere. I was just overseas, right? So my company's perimeter and attack surface went with me, so to speak. So I have to be even more careful and more diligent when I'm traveling, because connecting to Wi-Fi's and making sure my VPN's up to snuff and all that. So I'm protected. But maybe some call centers, you'll see everything local. But even then, now they're using things like Ring Central. We have an amazing phone system that's cloud hosted as well, right? So I mean, they may be deploying these things in the cloud, not even knowing it. Right? So yeah, it's all over the place. But it sure is fun to talk to different people and get their different feelings on how they feel about this.
Definitely.
So that's great. So I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't talk about some products, because that's why we're, in the end, why, how we stay a company. We innovate and we come out with all these products. So each one of these boxes is a different product solution area. In red is really where we got our start, in the FortiGate firewall. And that afforded us, to move laterally and vertically and horizontally and all over the place into these different areas, which includes, network infrastructure, all managed in the FortiGate, And then of course that when the cloud came along, with obviously working, hypervisors. So insert hypervisor here, our firewall runs there. So segmentation, east, west, north, south within a virtual environment. We cover you just about anywhere, whether it's, public cloud, private cloud, hybrid cloud. We have you there. Application load balancing. A lot of companies don't even know that. We have an amazing load balancer. We have a CASB. So CASB is application security for SaaS-based applications like Dropbox, Box, Workday, you name it, right? And then, across the top is all the management layer, right? So being able to, have, the minimum amount of consoles. There is no single pane of glass. If anybody's trying to sell you a single pane of glass, that's probably not the case. We have less panes of glass, but there are panes of glass. And something I always like to add there is it's usually not the same people running those panes of glass, because whoever's running the firewall and the endpoint probably isn't the person running my application development in my cloud hosted container compute area, right? Because their security is a lot different than network security. And application security and the whole shift left CI/CD pipeline for web, high performance hosted applications is a lot different than the same pane of glass that's your network security personnel, right? So you're never gonna have a single pane of glass. It just doesn't exist. The closest thing you're gonna get to it is SIEM, and that's because everything's going to report into it, but you're not going to be able to manage everything there, right? It's just more for the reporting. And then in the lower left, there's the zero trust access, and this is a place that we do really, really well, and we just probably don't talk enough about it. And that is, we have our own token system, physical and soft tokens. We have FIDO tokens. So if you passwordless tokens, so fingerprint, thumbprint tokens. And we have, Fortinet, which used to be Bradford Network. So it's a world-class NAC, which works really, really well. And Fort Authenticator, which allows me to set up SSO. And a lot of the clients that I go to, especially in public sector, don't have, single sign-on between all their different applications. And that's really handy. I mean, to be able to log in somewhere and have my identity follow me around in a secure fashion really makes it nice. And then FortiVoice is our phone system, whether it's on-prem or in the cloud. It's really, really incredible. And all this runs on FortiOS. So it's the same operating system that's running our firewall. So we have a security component built into our video and our voice solutions that's just native into it. So they're always looking for specific types of SIP threats and all that other stuff. All that reports back up into the fabric. It's automatically managed and controlled. So,
excuse me, Larry.
Yeah.
You just said everything runs on the FortiOS, so it's a single operating system, but you also said that there's not really such a thing as a single pane of glass.
Correct.
Even if you are using platforms or resources that have a single operating system or the same operating system, why can't you have a single pane of glass?
Well, typically it's different. Like I say, it's different users that are using that pane of glass to manage it, right? So whoever's managing my phone system is probably going to be more on the network side of things, but my cloud application developer probably doesn't have any business being in my phone system, right? Could we merge all that into a pane of glass? Yeah, I imagine we could, but I don't think the cost would be worth it because I don't think anybody would use it.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And is there a risk of, in that situation, of having important information slip through the cracks and using something to kind of fill in the gaps there? Or is, if everybody's kind of looking at things from their perspective responsibly, you're still going to be able to cover all your bases?
Yeah, that's where the SIM really comes in, right? All this should talk to the SIM and be looking, and the different parts of the SIM know about different types of threats it's looking for, and that's going to go to your NOC and SOC team. And then they're going to, in the ideal world, they will have good communications back into the different teams that are managing these different assets. Now, a lot of my customers, it's the same person, right? So at least half of my personal clients, it's actually the same person. They may want that. I don't think it's a reality for the industry to have for us to do that, just because it would cost so much to do it. But yeah, so they're going to rely on the SIM probably for all that.
Gotcha.
Yeah, those are really good questions. It's good to keep us honest because we talk about this stuff so much, and the customer concerns are really important, right? So getting those questions is really important. A case study I threw in here, and this kind of really talks about the fabric. So the company on the left here happens to be a European bank. I just liked this one. because it kind of says what we're really talking about. They have Fortinet security fabric with, access control layers, security intelligence, and the management at the top. But they also have all these other ecosystem integrations, and what the in-state architecture is over on the right. So if you're not familiar with TUFN or solutions like that, TUFN is kind of like, I would like to put, it's basically an orchestrator for orchestrators. This is obviously because they're saying large European bank, but if you're a large school or, K-12 or, county or city, and you have, Workday or Splunk and ServiceNow and all these things, we can use TUFN to tie all that together and automate outcomes, right? So we can, reprogram other fabrics, other pieces of fabrics, can talk back into TUFN and say there's a new workload, spin up a load balancer, spin up a security policy, do deep packet inspection because it's, this type of application that we're being used. These are the types of users that are getting to it externally, deploy a certificate, SSL certificate out there, all these things, right? So this is automation on steroids. This is not easy to get to, right? I'm going to be really blunt about it. This is where you're going to need all of our help, right? So if you're one of the customers on here that really wants to get to this, it happens. It can be done, but it's it's not easy to get to. The nice thing about it, once you do get to it, it's automated, and the fact that majority of at least the enforcement points are Fortinet, it's easy to troubleshoot, right? So that's really if there's anything that we can stress is to go with a security vendor's fabric, and of course we like to think ours is the best. And then the key takeaways is taking all the head scratching, the headache away from what used to be really peel layers of the onion, or some people like to call it the I like to say M&M approach. My security is crunchy and hard on the outside and soft in the center, right? So perimeter security gets most of the attention, where we should be doing things internally as well. So we go from a standard M&M to a peanut M&M, and then defense in depth, rather than deploying a bunch of different products to try and use different security tools to try and catch things because you're afraid one vendor is not going to get it. The reality is most of us vendors all share information in the background through the Cybersecurity Threat Alliance, and that's all the biggest vendors, security vendors in the world, all belong to that. That includes 3-letter agencies, all of them, and MITRE and all of them, right? So we're all sharing in the background, right? I like to say it's kind of like the criminal in the White House, outwardly there's a, public display, but there's a bat line in the case of emergency. They can pick it up and it rings to the other one and they can share information, right? It's not public, but it's happening, right? So the fabric really allows us to be able to get that information and program all of our different devices in automated fashion. And that's the formal presentation. Happy to stay on for question and answer, feedback, what anybody's hearing out there in the industry that that you would like to know about. If I have some idea of it, I'll share it. If I don't, I'll be honest and say talk to Javier and they'll give you everything you need to know.
If anybody wants to put anything in the chat, feel free. We are coming up close on time, but for myself, I know I'm available. Larry, if you're available, but please feel free to put something in the chat if you have any questions.
Yeah, I left time afterwards, so this is the fun part.